What is up, everybody? Unrested back again, and today we are starting a brand new segment called JNEWS. As I'm sure most of you understand, that means news in Japan. We're going to keep you up to date on current topics, events, and things happening in the news. I'm going to try and cover a little bit of everything. Today I'm just going to start with a very brief session and only a few questions. I just recently posted brand new status update to post your questions for JNEWS JFAQ. That's posted on my Facebook fan page. You can go there now if you want to check it out. Unrested JFAQ fan page. There is a JNEWS status update, and it asks that you please post questions about current news topics in the Japanese news, because if I don't maybe regulate that a little bit, I'm going to get questions all over the place, and it might not just follow current events. It might dig into like ancient past of Japanese news, which that's okay. I understand people are interested in that, but let's keep that more for JFAQ type stuff. This is more current events that I want to keep people up to date on. So what I've done here is I've taken some notes right here on my iPad, and I've got some of the news stuff open on my iPhone so that I can kind of have a reference as I'm speaking to you, because of course, I've read all these articles myself, I've reviewed them, I've always kept to date, I read the news every day, American news, Australian news, Singaporean news. Why? Because somehow my iPhone picks that up as where I'm registered to, I don't know why, and I read Japanese news every single day. I try to keep as international as I can and up to date as I can, because I feel news makes the world go round. Do I always believe it 100%? Not entirely, but there is some good stuff out there if you can pick and choose. Let's just begin. Let's just hop right in here. I'm sure if any of you are following stuff happening in Japan right now, you probably know the most important thing is the elections. That's the most important thing happening right now. Those of you who don't know, Shinzo Abe has been elected for another term. It's kind of the first time we've had this in quite a while, actually, that a prime minister's continued on to another term. I don't know if most of you know, but a lot of prime ministers in the past have just stepped down with their tail between their legs and run off on every single promise they've ever made to anybody. Wow, surprise, a politician lying to people. Imagine that. Shinzo Abe, he pulled through, man. He has the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, if I have that correct, and they have pulled through to take another term here in office, and will be controlling the Diet once more. Now, that's probably the most up-to-date news you're probably going to get on electoral votes all around the world. Of course, we've got local stuff going on too. There is House votes, there are group votes. We don't have a Congress like you would have in America. We have the Diet, and for me to go into a full explanation of how the Diet works would take an entire other JFAQ. So you can go look that up on Wikipedia or whatever source you want to use right now to understand how Japan's diet works. And pretty much how things are going now is what people are kind of a little bit worried about with Abe being in office another term is, number one, Abe is very conservative. I know it's called the Liberal Democratic Party, but I guess in Japan that means totally the opposite thing. Don't always follow what these parties' names mean. Half the time they have nothing to absolutely do with the agenda of the political party involved. They are super conservative, very nationalistic. Abe isn't necessarily taking a step backwards with how Japan's conservative state will take place, but I know he is very conscientious of the islands that are in dispute with South Korea and China. He's probably going to get more strict on that, more kibishi on that aspect. He's always been pretty open-minded to foreigners, thank goodness, so I really don't care too much about his policies on that. I don't have much to worry about, thank goodness. I'm glad he's not that insanely conservative that he wants to take a step back into the 1930s. But one thing other people are worried about is that Abenomics, something you can also read about that I can't go into in a long detailed description or you'd be confused, are another thing that they're working out pretty well right now. But people are worried that he's going to get so focused on the fact that it's easy for him to win office that he's only going to focus on his nationalistic and conservative agenda and totally forget the economy again and let Japan slump once more. Well, we'll see how all that goes. I never try to predict anything that happens in politics because you really can't believe anything anybody says, let's be honest. Let's move on. We've got some interesting stuff here. This kind of gets more into the crime type stuff. Japan, of course, has its crime just like any other country. Now, I'm not picking on Japan. America has a hell of a lot of crime too, a ton more than Japan. So don't think I'm saying Japan's so dark and evil. Those of you who are Japan apologists. Let's just begin with one here. A 77-year-old man leaps to his death after killing his ailing wife in Chiba. This is kind of a common news story. This guy here was taking care of his wife, who was, if I believe, 79 years old, in a state of dementia, most likely Alzheimer's as well. And he wrote a suicide note that said he had grown insanely tired of taking care of her. You know, something you can somewhat sympathize with, but at the same time you wonder, why was he trying to do it completely on his own? Was there no government help? Was there no family involved? Did they not have any kids? Were they not helping out? Was the rest of the family just being selfish and letting this guy do everything on his own? We never find out the full story, and that's kind of one of my issues I always have with the Japanese newspapers. They're really very brief and very vague. Even if you go to a page that's totally in Japanese, not a translated page, I try to read as much as I can of both, translating where necessary, because there's a lot of kanji I don't know. And most times it always ends up so vague. You're like, well, wait, where was the kids? Or where was, like, do they have any neighbors that help? Or what, did they apply for any government aid? Or you never find this stuff out. Mostly because Japan is a very private society. They don't like to dig too deep. And they can actually run into problems with, like, lawsuits and libel and slander like that. So they can never really dig too deep, unfortunately. I feel bad for this guy, and I feel bad for this woman, of course. He killed her to get out of taking care of her because he was totally sick of it, but then immediately after he jumped 4 stories from his apartment and killed himself. So I'm not really understanding why he would have killed her over that if he was just going to kill himself after. He could at least, I guess, killed himself and let her live and just contacted someone to come take care of her. Or vice versa, he could have killed her and stayed alive and gone to jail and at least, I guess, lived out his life in jail, maybe in shame. That's another problem that a lot of people see here in Japan, is that once they've done something evil, death, or I should say suicide, death from suicide comes right after because they don't want to live with the shame. They've lost face. So most likely this is what has occurred here. A very tragic situation. There's no good that could have come of that. Next we have an 81-year-old grandmother. You'll notice a lot of these deal with old people in Japan because we have a huge gray generation here. There's a lot of old people who live a very long time in Japan. 81-year-old grandmother killed after being assaulted by her 17-year-old granddaughter. Now, it's a little bit misleading, that title. I read into it a little bit more, and the 17-year-old granddaughter was actually first fighting with her mother at her house. And the grandmother, who was 81 years old, tried to intervene and break up the fight. I guess this was quite a physical, violent fight. Over what, we will never know, because once again, this is a situation where the news really can't dig too deep or find out too much. But apparently, while intervening, she was knocked down, most likely, I guess, pushed or shoved or possibly punched or kicked. And the resulting hit to the ground, the blow on the ground, made her lose all vitals. She's dead from that. She went to the hospital and arrived dead. So unfortunately, her intervening on that fight got her killed, which is horrible because, number one, most likely this was just a 17-year-old girl throwing a fit. Why, we don't know. It might be for very selfish reasons. It might be for reasons we totally don't understand. We're not given enough information. Honestly, my heart goes out to the grandmother in this situation, and I would say also the kid. I mean, we really don't know the situation. If perchance this was just a young girl throwing a fit, as sometimes boys and girls both do in their teenage years, let's be honest, and you act out on a lot of emotion. Your emotions are all over the place. Hormones are kicking in. You're trying to fight with your independence and dependence at the same time. Who knows what could have happened? This is going to ruin her life. Obviously, it ruined the 81-year-old woman's life, who's gone, and who knows what this will do with the relationship with the parents as well. Everything is pretty ruined from this. I guess the one thing she's kind of lucky about here in Japan, you are not considered an adult till 20 years old. They cannot even release her name in the newspaper because she is not a legal adult. And she will most likely not be tried for any kind of long sentence or anything like that. They said she will be tried for manslaughter. Yes, Japan has the death penalty, and as some of you might know, it is actually hanging. So if you ever are a teacher here, try to stay away from playing the game Hangman. Not the best idea for a teaching lesson here in Japan. But to actually get the death sentence here in Japan, you would actually have to have killed in an extremely brutal or disregard for life. You would have to have murdered more than one person most times, or just pretty much going out of your way to try to get the death penalty, which, I don't know. My personal feelings on the death penalty, I've never really been for the death penalty, but really, who can say unless you've been in that situation where you've actually had a family member murdered? I feel like those of us who have never been in that situation are unqualified to speak about it. Truly a subjective opinion. So that's pretty much it for all the main top titles on the top of most newspapers here in Japan for today. I'm going to go ahead and read one that I found kind of in the depths of the stuff that you find at the bottom of the newspaper. Something a little bit strange here. I've got to go back through my phone here and get it. It is a man in, I forget exactly where this was, Chiba, and he has been killed. Ah, here we go. A man operating a radio-controlled helicopter near Tokyo, so they don't say exactly where, has been killed by his own radio-operated helicopter. So it's a remote control helicopter, and he killed himself while using it. Apparently he was crop dusting in a farm that he owned, which I'm not really too familiar with techniques on farming, so this might be totally normal to use a remote control helicopter to crop dust. I'm not really too sure, so I shouldn't say like, what the hell was he doing? I'm no expert. He was a 60-year-old man. They found him lying dead with a head wound. They don't say exactly how the helicopter crashed into him, so that's kind of interesting to me. Like, do the blades actually move so fast they can like chop into your head? Because I remember one time reading a story about a guy who built model airplanes and the propeller chopped off his finger, and they used stem cells to grow his finger back. You guys might know that famous story. That's all they have on the information. There's actually a small video on it. You guys can go to Mainichi. Actually, I'm sorry, this one was on newsonjapan.com. You can also go to Mainichi Shimbun too and check out the same story. I think they've got the same video. And for my sources today, that's what I was using. I was using News on Japan, I was using Mainichi Shimbun, and I was also using Daily Yomiuri. So if you guys are wanting to check out my sources afterwards, please feel free to check out those great websites. I highly recommend all of them. They actually do stay up to date and talk about things that are relevant. So anyway, now we get into the question aspect of this. I'm going to let anybody just ask me some questions about what they've read about in the newspaper. We're going to start here with Vincent. He's got a good one. He says, I was reading about a 16-year-old girl that murdered another 16-year-old girl on a mountain in Hiroshima over about $300 in some online bad-mouthing. This is true. I have no doubt the U.S. is a more violent country. This is most likely true. But I can't say I ever hear of female minors killing another female minor, even here in Chicago. Is that a super isolated incident, or is there a regular occurrence of such crimes? Vincent, I would say that, especially in Hiroshima, is an extremely rare incident. Now, don't get me wrong, there is certain aspects of bullying within schools that has caused people to suicide. This gets into more technical stuff. Have those people actually murdered the kid? You know, a lot of different sides could be argued. Personally, I feel if a person has been pushed to a brink, that it does become murder. For example, there was one kid in, I believe this was near Tokyo, if I'm correct, Saitama, where every day the bullies at his school made him practice jumping from the first floor to see what it would be like to commit suicide, until one day he finally did jump from a higher floor and kill himself. That's pushing someone to kill themselves. That is homicide, in my own opinion, my subjective opinion. You know, obviously I'm no criminologist, but I feel like that's pushing someone to the brink. Other times where people have just been bullied at school consistently, their parents don't do anything, the teachers don't do anything, eventually they commit suicide. You know, who is to blame in that situation? Am I an authority that can really point fingers? Not really. Personally, I feel the parents, the teachers, the school system, and the government have failed that child. And they're all the ones that can be blamed as well. But there's part of it that does rest slightly on the child for not going to get help at the same time. But for the most part, I'd say a greater amount of it rests on the community and not on that actual child who's been bullied, because let's be honest, they are still a child, even in their teenage years. That's a very good question, Vincent. This story is extremely interesting. You guys can check it out. Just recently today, it was updated. This 16-year-old girl who was killed by another 16-year-old girl on a mountain in Hiroshima, I forget the name of the mountain. Today they found out she was driven there by 5 other friends who came along. I think almost all of them were boys, and they were not all members of the same school, but they have also been arrested in connection to this and could have possibly partaken in the murder. They think possibly there was a beating that occurred after, a beating that occurred before they got to the mountain, and she was strangled by the other 16-year-old girl finally. That was what the death blow was, at the mountain. Really a sad case. I don't know what was going on in the situation. Not enough has been revealed yet, but I'm sure we'll hear more about that, and I'll update you guys more later. James is next. Can you talk a little bit more about the election system works? If you know, I noticed during the Japan versus China soccer coverage today that there were many colors and numbers, and red seemed to be winning. I don't really know what other countries show for the electoral votes. We can watch locals here on our NHK network. As I've already updated you guys with, obviously the LDP won. Abe is going to be in office for another round. You know, there's a lot of local officials. God, I don't know any of their names. There's really no point for me because I can't vote for any of them. How the elections pretty much work here is if you are registered to vote, you can go to your local ward office, and sometimes local elementary schools have voting booths, pretty much almost the same as you would have in America. Almost always there have been written-in ballots in the past. Now, recently, since 2002, they have moved into electronic devices. Are those working out well? Sometimes, sometimes not. A lot of old folks call for it to go back to written-in ballots as they cannot actually handle the computer voting. So that's kind of how it works here. Andy says, I live in Japan and I have seen that a low percentage of the population voted. That is very true. It's actually lower this year than it was last year, too, on top of that. I have heard that a lot of the politicians say things specifically that appeal to the old folk. This is true again. Do you think that by trying to please the older generation, they are pushing the younger generation away from voting? Also, Japan changes prime ministers very often. Do you think that this makes the election lose validity? Okay, well, let me answer your first question. Do young people feel like politicians aren't taking care of them? Yeah, I would say 100% you're right on that. First of all, this opinion of mine comes from the fact I've read many an article in all the newspapers that I just mentioned that have talked about how the youth feels left out of today, you know. And I'm talking people 20 and up, they can vote. You need to be a legal adult to vote in Japan, and that's 20. And those people feel completely left out. Anyone from 20 to about up to 35 feels pretty much left out. And they still are kind of the youth of Japan. And they feel left out. I've talked to high school kids when I've worked at actual high schools who are close to the age of voting because by the time they finish, they're 19 or almost 19. And they also feel like there's no point. They say, I'm not even going to register. I don't see a point. You know, how does it affect me? All the policies cover stuff that's for old folks, for, you know, their pension, for their coverage of insurance, for their after-work care, for their, you know, retirement care and stuff like that. None of it affects me. You know, all it does is how's my money going to go to them when I start working? So, I mean, you've got to kind of empathize with them. What is the point of them voting? And I think it's something that's really going to plague Japan for quite a while until the younger generation finally starts to get noticed a lot more, or that there's more balance occurring, because right now the old people far outweigh the young people here in Japan, and that's because our population is declining rapidly. I'm sorry, as for the prime minister being changed very often, does it make the election lose validity? Of course. You know, as we've seen in the past, and as I've talked about in the past, a lot of the prime ministers get up there, make all kinds of promises. Finally, they get to their position, everybody's happy they got elected, and people start to call them out. They start to say, hey, you were going to move the base in Okinawa. Hey, you were going to go ahead and build these roads here. You're going to take care of the Fukushima disaster people. Why hasn't anything been done? Oh, and then they just put their tail between their legs, step down, and resign as prime minister. It's happened a lot. If you guys kept up with the news, what, like 4 times or 5 or 6 times in the past 2 or 3 years only, we've seen the prime ministers change after literally like months on post. And it's pathetic. My personal opinion, it shows the true face of these lying politicians. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves here. For the most part, I'd say 90% of politicians are complete and utter liars, or are too focused on their own personal agenda and not the people at hand. And I'm not just saying this is Japan's politicians. I'm saying this is the world's politicians, and especially America, where I come from, too. A lot of people had all kind of religious agendas that were bullshit, written by archaic old men who had no control over the modern world and had no connection to us. One thing I absolutely hated about living in America, and I guess maybe that's kind of one of the things I like a little bit more about Japan, is that at least our politicians are still liars here, but at least they don't have all kinds of religious agendas that are bullshit. Now, one thing I will say is a bullshit agenda is the fact that we're wasting so much time and money on worrying about these tiny little islands that we're fighting over with South Korea and China. I'd say what we need to focus on is helping the people from Fukushima who are still out of a house, out of a home, out of food, out of water. You know, people getting thyroid cancer from doing treatment on the plants, trying to work in horrible conditions and getting paid 1,000 yen an hour, which is like 10 bucks, risking their life while the government eats up all kinds of money that's been donated to them to help these survivors and these Fukushima disaster survivors. It's pathetic, and once again, it's a clear sign of liars, cheats, and the only people who are the victims are the same people who voted for them. Okay, Lamia next, she says, hey Scott, can you share your favorite websites for Japan news? I just talked about this, Lamia. Sorry I didn't see your question when I was saying that. She says, also, are there gossip magazines popular in Japan as it is in the US? Oh, you better believe it. You better believe it. But actually, Lamia, let me tell you, our variety shows, there's so many variety shows and gossip shows and shows like these talk shows that talk all kinds of dirt about talento and idols and Haiyu and stuff like that. We've got those on TV so much that you probably won't even need one of those magazines if you came here. Good question. Isaac says, did the Japanese media cover the killing of Shosei Koda? This is old news. I'm just wondering. This is old news. We can talk about this another time in a JFAQ, but as I said, I want to try and keep this as current as possible. Devin said, I'm surprised nobody has mentioned this yet. I was wondering your thoughts on Shinzo Abe is trying to start an active campaign to amend the Constitution of Japan. Your thoughts on this and his standpoint regarding this hypothetical military revival. Good question. Devin's keeping up with some stuff going on here in Japan. Devin, I think there's a lot of good things and bad things that can come about this. I personally do feel like Japan should be allowed to have their own full military again. I have some people say the SDF is a military, the self-defense force is a military. Technically, it's not supposed to be a military, but it is. But it's not allowed to actually attack. It's a defense force. It's not an offensive force. That means they are regulated to a point where unless someone actually viciously attacks Japan, they have to sit there and do nothing if they feel that they've been offended in any way. So right now we've got the situation with China constantly circling islands that by legal maps, international legal maps, belong to Japan, are owned by Japan, and the people who are the landowners there are Japanese. Japan really can't do much with that, and I feel like that's not right, that if we just had a normal military, Japan doesn't have to go in there and blow people up and kill shit. They just need to set down some armored craft and make them look scary. That's it. Just make the island look scary. Okay, we don't want to touch that. There's too many things there. Let's not get into that. It's not worth killing a few military people over such a tiny little island. But you know what? Things like that have happened in the past. I mean, you know, there's been tons of stupid historic wars over stupid tiny little islands. You know, if we can just amend the Constitution, get them their military without spending buckets on this stupid island and actually take care of the people who actually need money in Japan, like I said, the Fukushima survivors, then I'm all for it. If it's going to get into wasting a ton of money on things that are not productive to help Japan become a better nation overall, and also in the sense of peace, I think it's definitely not worth it. Now, there are other aspects where things are still controlled by the American military, where I think they need to step off now. You know, it's been ages since World War II. You know, the American military doesn't own Okinawa anymore. That's one thing. I don't know if they necessarily need that base there anymore, since it seems like they can't keep the Marines under control. A lot of raping, a lot of thieves going on, thievery going on there. They're having a lot of problems there, and they keep wanting to move that base. America's talked about moving that base. Okinawa's talked about moving that base. Nothing's happening. Something needs to happen with that, or something needs to get under control, because those people don't really deserve a lot of the treatment that they get from the military base from there, and they do put up with a lot of bullshit. It is kind of sickening to see. And I'm, that's coming from me as an American. I support our troops 100%. You guys are fucking awesome. A lot of my friends here are ex-military from Okinawa and Yokohama. I've got a cousin in the military right now. But I don't like how a lot of the people there in Okinawa are treated. Okinawans are by far some of the most peaceful Japanese people you will ever meet. You have never met more laid-back, island-living, sake-bum people out there that are awesome to chill with. Let me tell you, hang out at a beach party with an Okinawa person, you will have a freaking great time. So I would just like to see them left in peace. As for anything else controlled by that amendment, I haven't gotten into it deep enough yet to really see other factors. I know the military is the biggest one right now. There's some other stuff I'd like to see changed too, as far as education here in Japan. There's a lot of huge problems. But again, I don't have a chance to vote, so what does my subjective view matter at all, right? I'm never going to become a citizen here because I don't see a point in holding two passports. I'm fine with my permanent resident visa. I don't need citizenship, so perhaps all my voice on this is completely moot and pointless. So that's my 2 cents, and my mom always told me they were really shiny, so I thought I'd give them to you anyway. Guys, that's JNEWS for you. I hope you enjoyed this segment. Great questions. I know we only had a few, but guys, this is the very first one, and I only gave you a short amount of time to put them up here. Next time, we're going to go for a lot more time and a lot more questions. Hopefully, people start to research a little bit more. Check out some of the links. I'll put them down there in the bottom for these different newspaper websites you can check out, so you too can join in on JNEWS JFAQ. Until next time, I'm Unrested. See ya.